Good morning, whichever time you are watching and listening to Point of View with Miss Shirley Polk. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here with me today. The Lord is good to each and every one of us, and I am just grateful, grateful, grateful. Dear God, as I sit before you to speak, I pray to you that my soul you will keep. And if I should die before I finish, I pray to you, dear God, in the name of Jesus, that any outstanding sins will be forgiven. Amen. We are live today, which is the 27th of May in the year 2025. And I am just grateful. Time to come on live is at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And you have Greater Gospel Temple and Inspiration of God Ministries on Saturday evenings at 7:39 and Sunday mornings at 7 a.m. And the Mother's Board Inc., along with Dr. Mac, we are on Fridays at 1 p.m. And I do have S Polk Light On, which is TBA. Whenever I get an interviewee, then I will come on for S Polk Light On, featuring people that I know of that are in my life, and I like to tell their stories. So today, I'm going to go into what I'm going to talk about today. And I started talking about the blood pressure of African Americans and continue. That's supposed to be continuation. Let me spell that right. That is supposed to be continuation. I think I did a spell check and it put that on there for some reason. Okay, let me get this word right now. It has to be right. Continuation. Okay. TIN. Continuation. Okay, there it is. All right. Got it spelled right that time. Continuation of blood pressure in people of African descent. Because I've thought about this, and they say that we are more prone to hypertension, high blood pressure than other races of people. And I'm thinking, I don't quite agree with that, because how can they really know when they say we're the minority and they are measuring us by who they say is the majority? Now, how can you come out? I know figures are complicated many times and everything, but common sense is just common sense. So I wanted to just bring this out on my webcast, my point of view of it, because I want to know, well, how do they really, really know, and why? Because we are a different hue of skin. We are all I mean, many of us, even in the African people of African descent, we have other ethnicities, other bloodlines in us. There's so much, and so like I was in the blood pressure measurements. I remember not too long ago. I know they say blood pressure 120 over 80 is a great blood pressure, and so then one year, and I know they did. They said, well, it's okay if it's 130 over, 20. If it goes up to 130, whatever. Then they came back down, and so I'm thinking, because there's a saying, and I'm not trying. I'm not. Don't ever, ever think I'm telling you not to take your blood pressure medicine. Okay? Don't ever think I'm telling you not to take your medications, your prescribed medications. That's not it. This is Point of View with Miss Shirley Polk. These are my thoughts about things, okay? And so I'm thinking about this and okay. And then also I was like my son and my daughter said, the money is not in the cure, it's in the medicine. So many times they have us on these medications, and we really don't need to be on the medications. And if you on your devices and commercials, whichever device you watch, whether it's television, your phone, computer, whichever, your laptop, your tablet, whichever, and you see these, well, what do we call them? Commercials, presentations, and there's one that comes on where this man has said, "I'm a doctor," and they tell you need to take this and you need to take that, but then they don't tell you about the one thing that can lower your blood pressure, and that's grapefruit. Eating a grapefruit. You see different promotions like this, and then we are so set on letting specific people tell us what we should do and what we shouldn't do, till we are afraid to try natural remedies. But I'm not. I'm not afraid to try a natural a remedy. As a matter of fact, I do, and I thank God for it, because there was a couple of years, and I thank God that I very seldom do I get a cold. And I for 2 years straight, was it 2 years straight? I got a cold. A cold caught me, and it had me in the bed, and the Lord gave me, and I believe it was him, because it came to my mind about the old fashioned remedies that we used to, our parents mixed up, our grandparents mixed up, and that's what I started doing, and I got well. And then when I went to my doctor for the checkup, and she told me, well, it worked. It made me well. It expelled all of that infection that was in me, and I was on a regimen of what I was taking. And I tell you, by the grace of God, it healed me. Natural remedies. Okay? And then there is, I read this book by Jethro Kloss, Kloss, and he's not a doctor, he's a researcher. And he has a book called Back to Eden. And he talks about the cure for cancer. And he tells where he offered to show the government how to cure cancer. And he told them, all you have to do is provide the place, and I'll do everything else. And they turned him down. It's in his book. But I have red clover tea. I don't have cancer, but I keep red clover tea because it's good for other things too. But I tell people, and I don't try to pry in people's business, and I suggest when I feel led to suggest, but I'm suggesting today, I don't believe it'll hurt if you're suffering from a disease, a cancer. I don't think it would hurt. I'm not telling you to do it, but I'm telling you I do. I drink red clover tea periodically, and I have my alarm set for 3 o'clock every day to remind me to drink my red clover tea. Now, I'm not saying that it's a cure all, but I'm just telling you about the back to Eden, how Jethro Kloss said he cured people of cancer. And red clover tea was a main tea. He told me about a mailman when he was a little boy. The mailman was diagnosed with cancer, and he said the mailman would stop by their home and get that red clover tea from them, and said he lived many years, many years. So let me tell you this and put this disclaimer here. Okay, a verbal disclaimer. I am not saying don't take your medicine. I am not saying don't go to therapy. I am not telling you. I am not a medical doctor, but I know quite a lot about it because I've studied, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm telling you that, okay? All right. But I have used remedies and I have done things and they have proven to be good. And remember, uh, so the herbs are good for the healing, for healing. They're good for healing. Okay. Now I'm going on into this continuation of blood pressure in people of African descent. Why diet is different from one ethnicity to the other, and our diet, soul food. So I want to talk about that today. But there are remedies here, natural remedies for the conditions, and I there it's your diet. Your diet plays a part in your health, in our health. The diet, our consumption, different ingredients we use. We have to be moderate in everything. Don't put too much salt. Don't put too much sugar. And my consumption of sugar, I know sugar isn't just about everything, but in my drinks, and I use, what is it? Not the saccharin, but the substitute for it in my drinks and everything. So, and then I try to, my juices, my grapefruit juice, my orange juice, I try to stick to the low sugar and the no sugar ones. I do the best that I can, but I'm not saying I'm completely off of it because everything just about has some kind of sugar in it. Okay. So, but I watch myself. I watch myself, and for how long God has blessed me to live, I am thankful. And I will testify, like they say, I thank God for my life, health, and strength, my reasonable portion of strength and health. I thank Him for it. I am so grateful to God. And it's because I am aware of what I put in my body. Now, I have like grown out some. Yes, I have. I'm working on that too. But I am just so thankful to God because He guides and He provides. Okay, so I'm going to get into these articles right here, and this is what I want to talk about. Let me go to the blood pressure. I want to go to the blood pressure and why they say that our blood pressure we have is more difficult than other people's. And I've never bought into that. And this article right here kind of talks a little bit like I like for it to talk because I know that there's some difference. Why is hypertension, the title of it is Why is Hypertension More Common in African Americans? And it is let me see, Thomas G. Pickering. Thomas G. Pickering uh, release says. And so I read part of it. I think it was Thursday, but I'm going to start from the beginning. In the last article of this series, some recent findings were discussed that suggest that depression might be a factor contributing to the onset of hypertension, particularly in African Americans. It is well known that hypertension is more common in African Americans um, than in Caucasians, but the reasons for this remain obscure, and we have to realize everybody we are totally different. Our makeup, our genetics, and everything. So that has to be a part of why there is a difference in the blood pressure. All of that plays into it. Everybody is not the same. The issue revives the old nature nurture debate. The old nature nurture debate. Do African Americans have a genetic predisposition that leads to hypertension, or does it have to do with their environment? And that's anybody else's, because I know that the other ethnicities have uh, an epidemic of high blood pressure, going by the charts that they have now. And I know they've done the scientific research and all of that. And I'm not debating. I'm not fighting against any of that. But there's a difference. There's a difference. Okay, there is a difference. So, does it have to do with their environment? As one might guess, the answer almost certainly lies somewhere in between, in accordance with Oscar Wilde's adage that truth is rarely pure and never simple. Some recent studies have thrown light on this question, and to mind, this is the writer saying mind, favor the predominance of environmental factors. Oh, yes, because sometimes I say, well, why are we darker? But then, like in Africa, even though I've never been to Africa, but I am of African descent. And so my skin tone is not as dark as many of the people, the, what is it? I should say the native Africans. I think I'm saying that right. But because we have changes, we have different ethnicities in us, in our bloodline. Well, yes, we do. Oh my goodness, this is so good. Okay, so one of the problems in this debate is that we are trying to, and this is what was going through my mind too. We are trying to relate to poorly defined entities the concept that racial differences in chronic diseases are due to genetic differences among races has been repeatedly challenged. There is no way to consistently classify people by race. There are continuous gradations between ethnic groups, and genetic analysis have found that there is more genetic variation within one ethnic group than between one group and another. And there are changes in our genetics all the time. There are changes, and we're just what is they? There's a song that says, "I'm tied up." Let me see, tangled up, wrapped up, and we mixed up with so many different bloodlines in us. So the American Anthropological Association recently stated human biological variations should not be reduced to race. And that's exactly how I think about it. So it is too complex and does not fit this outdated idea. Race is real rather than being based on biology. It is a social and political process that provides insights into how we read deeper meaning into phenotypes. Racialization and racism come about because in a racialized culture, we read meaning into skin color and other phenotypic variants rather than biology affecting behavior. Ideology and behavior affect individuals under the skin. So let me do that one again. Racialization and racism come about because in a racialized culture, we read meaning into skin color and other phenotypic variants rather than biology affecting behavior. Ideology and behavior affect individuals under the skin. So, a huge effort has already been made to try to understand the reasons for the higher prevalence of hypertension in African Americans, almost all of which has involved the underlying assumption that there is some genetically determined physiologic difference. So far, the results have been disappointing at best. For one thing, it is becoming clear that, with rare exceptions, human hypertension is determined by several genes, and it is unlikely that genetic factors account for more than 50% of hypertension in people of African descent who do not necessarily live in America. It is not sufficient merely to show that there are ethnic differences in the allelic polymorphisms of candidate genes. It is necessary that the observed differences can account for the differences in blood pressure. So far, although there have been descriptions of both genetic and physiologic differences between African Americans and Caucasians, it is not clear whether these actually contribute to the blood pressure differences. See, they're not clear on this. And so, us being of a totally different genetic makeup, and then we are all uh, mixed in together, there is a difference. So if ours might be 125 over 80, 130 over 80, hey, because of our genetics, that might be why, and it might not register high. But when they go by the basics and they say this is for everybody, this is just this set. If you don't have this, you're going to have high blood pressure. And I don't believe it's like that. And they are finding out. So the latest example is a hypothesis that creatine kinase, which has been observed to be present in the greater amounts of the skeletal muscle of African Americans than Caucasians, could be a genetic factor that predisposes African Americans to hypertension, which is on the scale that they measure everybody's blood pressure on. Okay? Now we have to think about that too. So, it could be a genetical factor that predisposes African Americans to hypertension. If it is also increased in vascular smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. At the present time, there is not a scintilla of evidence that this is the case and that it affects blood pressure. They say it's not an inkling, not just a little bit, okay, of proof. So, one practical aspect of these discussions is whether hypertension should be treated differently in African Americans and Caucasians. So much has been written about angiotensive converting enzyme inhibitors being less effective in African Americans, but one of the largest studies to examine this, conducted by the Veteran Administration, found that the response to captopril and their antihypertensive drugs was influenced to a greater. My mouse is moving like I don't want it to. Okay, let me go back and do that. This is a long sentence, so let me get to the beginning of this sentence. Much has been written about angiotensive converting enzyme inhibitors being less effective in African Americans, but one of the largest studies to examine this, conducted by the Veterans Administration, found that the response to captopril and other antihypertensive drugs was influenced to a greater extent by whether the patients lived inside or outside of the stroke belt of the southeastern United States than by their ethnicity. The region, okay, the region. There is so much, and I'm so glad that somebody has dug into it and they're still digging into it. So, furthermore, the differences in response rates that have been observed have usually been relatively small, and while they may achieve statistical significance, they do not achieve clinical significance. So, finding the right antihypertensive drug still, unfortunately, is still, unfortunately, a matter of trial and error. And so the thing is, just like this article is saying, they're looking at the skin tone, they're looking at the race, but they are comparing it and setting the scale on the scale that they apply to the race that's supposed to be a majority. But we are different. And I'm so glad that somebody is looking into this. So, one of the most prov- uh, powerful pieces of evidence that environmental and particularly psychosocial factors are important in the development of hypertension in a series of epidemiologic studies conducted over many years, which have shown that when people move from a traditional tribal society to an urban, westernized lifestyle, their blood pressure rises. Many of these studies have been conducted in Africa, and hypertension is or was relatively rare in rural Africans. A good example is let me I'm having a thing with this mouse here. I'm on a roll and it's trying to mess with me. Okay. A good example is the Luo study from Kenya. People who had moved to Nairobi had higher pressures than people living in the villages, even if they had been in the city for only 1 month. They also had higher heart rates, consistent with activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So while these studies indicate that there is something presser about our Western lifestyle, they do not tell us whether it is stress or diet that is more important. So, and in parentheses, they say it is probably both. Then there's another study from Africa that sheds light on the question. Egypt, being at the intersection of the Arab countries and Africa, has a multi ethnic society with dark skinned Nubians in the south and paler skinned people in the north. The authors measured skin color and blood pressure and found no relation between the two in men and a rather weak association in women that was nonlinear. The women with the highest pressures tended to have brown rather than black skin. In contrast, studies conducted in the US have generally shown that darker skin is associated with higher blood pressure. So that should tell you to right there that there is a difference in the level of normalcy in the blood pressures in the ethnic groups. So the genetic school would explain this on the grounds that skin color is a marker of the admixture of African and European genes, and that African genes lead to high blood pressure, while the environmental school would say that the color of one's skin determines the way one is perceived in society, and that this influences the blood pressure. The Egyptian study favors the latter and corroborated, and it is corroborated by an epidemiologic study from Cuba, where communism has presumably broken down the cultural barriers that separate African Americans and Caucasians in the U.S., and where the ethnic blood pressure differences are quite small. Studies from other countries also show that the higher blood pressure seen in African Americans is not invariable. In England, the health surveys for England, equivalent to the National Health and Examination Survey or the NHANES in the US, found that the prevalence of hypertension was much higher in African Americans than Caucasians, even after controlling for potential mediators such as age, body mass index, and alcohol intake. However, another study conducted in English factory workers found no ethnic differences in blood pressure. It's all about the body and the makeup, and the normalcy lies there. Mine may not be exactly like yours, and yours may not be exactly like mine, but it doesn't mean when it's in the range of the 20, 30, 40 that I am hypertensive, but they read it like that and they quick to put you on that medication which gives gout and all kinds of different things. It has side effects too. Okay, so while these variable findings are difficult to explain on a genetic basis, they also cannot be accounted for by differences in the major environmental risk factors of hypertension, such as obesity and salt intake, since these have been controlled for in several of the studies that have disclosed an ethnic difference in pressure. I know you hear fresh. He's a fussing. So the risk factor that has been almost totally neglected in studies of racial differences in blood pressure is a social environment. While there is a pronounced gradient in the prevalence of cardiovascular disease according to socioeconomic status in most affluent countries, a socioeconomic gradient of blood pressure is not seen very consistently. A series of classic studies conducted by Ernest Harburg in Detroit in the 1970s was the first to really probe the question. He showed that blood pressure in African Americans living in the inner city was highest in people living in the worst off neighborhoods. And hey, stress, you can tell that, can't you? Stress, okay? A more recent analysis of the arteriosclerosis risk in communities as ARIC, studied by Diaz Rue, for example, found that neighborhood effects were independently related to blood pressure after controlling for other risk factors. Now, in 4 U.S. communities, people living in the neighborhoods with the lowest median house prices tended to have the highest blood pressure. Now, this was most pronounced in the one community, Jackson, Michigan, that was largely African American. So this brings us to the environmental factor that stares us in the face as a potential cause of the higher prevalence of hypertension in African Americans, which has largely been ignored by researchers, perhaps because it is so politically sensitive. They couldn't have said it any better. And any writer, and as Chris Tucker said in that movie, it don't get no writer. And I guarantee. So racial discrimination, I saw that expression in an earlier show. It was before Chris started doing movies. I don't know whether it was some show that I was watching. And they said it don't get no writer. So anyway, let me go back and get that right. But I was thinking about that. So this brings us to the environmental factor. It stares us in the face as a potential cause of the higher prevalence of hypertension in African Americans, which has largely been ignored by researchers, perhaps because it is so politically sensitive. Racial discrimination. The only epidemiologic study I am aware of, this is a writer talking, in which this was investigated with regard to blood pressure is the CARDIA, CARDIA, that's the acronym, study of young African American and Caucasian men and women, one of the studies showing that depression is a risk factor for hypertension in African Americans. Subjects were asked if they had experienced racial discrimination and how they had reacted to it. Although 80% of the African American subjects reported having experienced some discrimination, and who accepted unfair treatment and talked to others about it. No, 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 no. Let me go back. Let me go back. Subjects were asked if they had experienced racial discrimination and how they had reacted to it. Although 80% of the African American subjects reported having experienced some discrimination, the relationship with blood pressure was not what might be expected. Systolic pressure was 7.4 millimeters hemoglobin higher in men who reported no discrimination. Okay, so the systolic pressure was 7.4 millimeters Hg higher in men. All right. And then I want to make sure that I'm remembering my nursing training here. Yeah, it's the mercury. Uh-huh. Hg, mercury. All right. There we go. Now let me get back to that. Okay. Higher in men who reported no discrimination and who accepted unfair treatment and talked to others about it. It was also higher in women who reported no discrimination. This is a strange result. While it shows that there is a substantial effect, it is the opposite of what one would expect. The authors of this study had to perform some contortions to explain the findings and suggested that the people who reported no discrimination were actually in a state of denial or internalized oppression and found the topic too painful to acknowledge. Isn't that something? If they don't know, they go back. It's because you're in denial. People know their feelings and everything. They know. So in evaluating the effects of physiological influences on blood pressure, such as racial discrimination and living in disadvantaged neighborhoods, we are faced with the problem of having to assign numbers to the phenomena that are inherently subjective and hard to define. This is, of course, a common problem in behavioral science, and in many cases we must rely on self-reporting, usually using a standard questionnaire. So, one of the limitations of the procedure is that people are not always accurate in how they answer such questions because they may give the answers that they think are expected of them rather than what they really believe. So, however, whether something is hard to measure should not deter us from making the effort to do so, particularly when the answer to the question being posed is so important. That is so true. And I will repeat that. They just claim, oh well, it's because they call us black, but I don't call myself black because my skin tone is brown. And whoever disagrees with me, hey, oh well, that's you. But my skin tone is more brown. It is not black. And like I have said, I have seen black people. I mean, literally black. And the ones I saw, I've seen some that are so black that they look blue. They have a blue hue to them, and I've seen it some that are just black, and they were not African. Okay, all right, but they were from that region. All right. However, whether something is hard to measure should not deter us from making the effort to do so, particularly when the answer to the question being posed is so important. This is an area that needs more research, and it is time to move on from the simplistic concept of race as genes. Oh, I like this so much. And I am in pmc.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. Okay, that's where I am, and so I'm going to. I think I'm gonna do this and put it on the in my comments so you can go there and see that. That's what I'm going to do. Put it in my comments, okay? So you can see that. All right. Now that was very interesting. Now, how much time do I have? I only have 15 minutes to talk about uh, the food and the regions. Uh, Let me go ahead and do this. Talk about it because this is very interesting to me. Uh, the cultures, the role of food and cultural identity, exploring the connection between food and cultural heritage. And this is, let me see, you know, M, oh, momentslog.com. Momentslog.com. So, uh, I'm going to go ahead and get into this. Food is not just a means of sustenance, it is a powerful tool that shapes our cultural identity. And that is so true. The way we eat, the ingredients we use, and the rituals we follow around food are all deeply rooted in our cultural heritage. Food is a universal language that transcends borders and connects people from different backgrounds. So, in this article, we will explore the role of food in cultural identity and how different cultures approach eating. And I like what they were saying about, and we can tell, and as I was reading this about the Japanese and how their food is so colorful and it's just like decoration, isn't it? And so food plays a significant role in shaping our cultural identity. It's a reflection of our history, of our story, I'll put it like that, our traditions and values. The ingredients we use in our dishes often have a story to tell, passed down through generations. For example, here we go. In Mexican cuisine, corn is a staple ingredient that has been cultivated for thousands of years. It represents the deep connection between the Mexican people and their land. Similarly, in Italian cuisine, tomatoes are a key ingredient that symbolizes the Mediterranean climate and the vibrant flavors of the region. Hey, I didn't know that. Food also serves as a way to preserve cultural heritage. Traditional recipes are often passed down from one generation to the next, ensuring that the flavors and techniques are not lost over time. So, in many cultures, cooking is a communal activity where family uh, members come together to prepare meals. So this is not only strengthens family bonds, but also helps to preserve cultural traditions. For example, the Indian cuisine, the art of making curry, involves a complex blend of spices and techniques that have been perfected over centuries. The rituals and customs around food are another important aspect of cultural identity. So, in some cultures, certain foods are reserved for special occasions or religious ceremonies. For example, in Japan, the tea ceremony is a highly ritualized practice that involves the preparation and serving of matcha tea. It is not just about the tea itself, but also about the mindfulness and respect that goes into the process. Similarly, in many Middle Eastern cultures, the breaking of bread is a symbol of hospitality and friendship. This is nice. In different cultures also have different attitudes towards food and eating. In some cultures, food is seen as a source of pleasure and enjoyment. Meals are often elaborate and indulgent with a focus on flavor and presentation. In other cultures, food is primarily seen as a source of nourishment. Meals are simple and focused on providing sustenance rather than culinary pleasure. For example, in many Asian cultures, rice or noodles are the main component of a meal with small portions of meat and vegetables. This is nice. The globalization of food has also had an impact on cultural identity as people travel and migrate to different parts of the world. They bring their culinary traditions with them. Now, this has led to the fusion of different cuisines and the creation of new dishes that reflect the diversity of our global society. For example, in cities like New York or London, you can find a wide range of international cuisines from from India to Ethiopian to Mexican. Okay, now I have 9 minutes, so I'm going to the next one, and that, like I said, is momentslog.com. Now let me go to this one, the do, and it is the do dot osteopathic.org. The do.osteopathic.org, and I'll put that in the comments also. Diversity in Medicine by Alexander Ford, DORD. Food from the Soul, a history of African American culture and nutrition. And this is an adaptation, and it was updated in February. It says so many adaptations by necessity during slavery to traditional African foods decreased their nutritional value and compromised their inherently nutritious properties. So that was December the 1st, 2022. So then the editor's note here is that the following article was published in December 2022. It said we have updated it and are highlighting it in February 2025 as our monthly throwback article. Our effort to share post columns to provide helpful advice and information to the osteopathic medical community. Now we get into it. Soul food is a phrase that commonly describes foods once enjoyed in the homelands of previously free Africans and adapted in the United States following Africans' voyage to the U.S. on slave ships. Old and New World crops, European and Native American influences, and African traditions have all contributed to soul food cuisine. Following their integration into Western culture, African foods were significantly modified. Many adaptations made by necessity during slavery to traditional African foods decreased their nutritional value and compromised their inherently nutritious properties, starting relatively unhealthy dietary patterns. So many of these unhealthy adaptations have persisted across generations and have helped contribute to the development of chronic diseases and decreased lifespans in many African Americans who currently suffer higher rates of some chronic diseases over Americans of other races. So, this is uh, an African American author here, okay? So, when you go to this site, you'll see it. So, it is helpful for physicians to understand the history or the story of soul food and how it evolved over the years as it relates to chronic disease and health in African American populations. And we know part of this story already, don't we, about soul food. The phrase soul food is thought to have become prominent during the Black Power movement of the 1960s when the word soul was commonly used to describe our culture. Black eyed peas, yams, and sweet potatoes are a few of the foods that commonly appear in soul food dishes. Enslaved Africans also brought over okra and the kola nut, which Western Africans often chewed as a source of caffeine for energy. The cola, KOLA nut, is also heralded as a primary driver in the soda pop industry and a key ingredient in the original cola formulation. Who they say brought it over here? Hmm. Okie dokie. The Africans. So many fruits and vegetables brought from Africa grew well in America. So enslaved Africans planted gardens to help sustain themselves and others in their community. Then the American modifications led to decreases in nutritional properties. We had to eat. They did what they were given, and they were most of the time, as the stories are told, they got what was left if they killed animals. All was supposed to be the best went to the families that they were working for, and then they kept the kidneys, intestines, and all of that. And by golly gee, didn't we make some great dishes? And now they've almost priced us out of buying our chitterlings, our hog maws, our pig feet, and all of that. But that used to be discarded. But we made it useful and nutritious. I say nutritious, okay? Because everything should be done in moderation, all right? So with the modifications, oh, I have 3 minutes, led to decreases in nutritional properties. So enslaved Africans used knowledge from their heritage to create what we now call soul food, a cuisine enjoyed by many that is inextricable from the American South. For example, gumbo, a renowned dish in New Orleans, is usually thickened with okra and is a version of the Senegalese stew made in plantation kitchens by enslaved Africans. As previously mentioned, many of the tweaks to soul food made during slavery decreased the nutritional value of traditional African dishes and contributed to unhealthy dietary patterns. And then there's the millet and the sorghum. Cereal grain plants rich in nutrition were commonly found in early Senegal and Sudan. They were especially prized in areas where rice and wheat were difficult to grow. The typical African meal used millet and sorghum as a type of porridge in stews and sauces. Sorghum is naturally rich in B vitamins and is a good source of protein, nutrients needed for survival in hot African climates. This is neat. And millet and sorghum, they lack gluten. So the bread made from these grains is unleavened and flat. These flat breads inspired the soul food classic hot water cornbread. These breads were created to help scoop up food and replace utensils as meals. Enslavers usually forbid enslaved Africans from using utensils for cooking and eating due to fearing they could be used as weapons during a revolt. And then the next part here, and then I'm going to have to close out. While sorghum and corn grain have nutritional benefits, hot water cornbread is typically fried in a skillet with butter and salt. So, this modified practice reduces the bread's nutritional value by adding large amounts of salt and fat that can contribute to chronic diseases like obesity and cardiovascular disease. And now we have to realize we have to exercise too. Okay, so I'm going to continue this, God willing, on Thursday. I love you so much, and thank you for being here with me. You are wonderful, and I'm praying that God will continue to bless and keep you, and that you will be willing to be kept in His will. I love you. Please let me hear from you.